This is a subject I believe that might turn some heads in the community, but not in a way of enjoyment, in a way of confusion, and maybe even frustration, maybe even outrage. So let me explain my feelings first. The soundtrack to a video game is one of the greater parts of the experience. On any first run of a video game, I will always keep the audio as it's meant to be, so that the beats hit right and the greater vision that was intended by the developers is always there. A great soundtrack is a baseline fundamental for many franchises and games we consider iconic. So before you panic and get into an outrage saying, why do I turn off the music and ruin the experience of what a game is meant to be, know for a fact that I will always play a game the first time around with the music where it was meant to be and how it was fully intended. But that doesn't detract from the fact how I play games most of the time. I play plenty of games with no soundtrack. Before we get rid of the soundtrack in a cliche essay fashion, let's have a look at the soundtracks of the past that we fell in love with first. And I can't tell you where to begin because the music is easily the heart of so many franchises. Ocarina of Time's serene intro music, holding our hands to embark on a brand new journey in a brand new breathtaking world of Zelda. Hearing that menu theme, even hearing covers to it, I am hooked and obsessed with just how beautiful, how melancholy and how dreamlike it is. Or not to forget Halo's thunderous Warthog run, with its drums and incredible guitar riffs, hyping the player and empowering the spur of what true sci-fi warfare is. The feeling of dread, the feeling of trying to escape, the feeling of trying to get off the Halo ring before it explodes. There is nothing, in my opinion, in Halo more iconic than just hearing that thunderous applause right at the end. There's a feeling of dread and sadness and loss that comes with the Last of Us theme, especially when it hits in that intro title drop after Joel just lost his daughter. This is what I'm talking about. Music is so important to the narrative, the tone. It's so important to the table that's been set for players to become a guest at. FromSoft's legacy is forever connected to the incredible works from Yuka Kitamura, not only giving every battle and every game a sense of life and longevity, but it gives it a sense of presence, a sense of meaning with each track, some that many Souls fans hold in such high regards, and is easily some of the best we've heard in the industry. Music for a long time in video games started pretty simple, almost silent due to the lack of understanding due to the memory limitations of the time. From Space Invaders' intense and creaking dread to Sonic's Green Hill Zone, Final Fantasy's victory theme, and of course Doom Eternal's The Only Thing They Fear Is You. Music has evolved in so many incredible ways and made itself a foundation to what this industry has to offer. There is an expectation and identity that's even embedded with the use of music motifs in the music we hear in gaming. When you hear Ezio's family being heard echoed across history, across almost every single Assassin's Creed game in its universe, you are welcomed, and it reminds us as players that we're part of this universe and a part of this ever-growing story. The way Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom carries over the motifs from previous Zelda games, with an example like Rito Village theme being a small callback to Dragon Roost Island from the Wind Waker, and on top of that, in Tears of the Kingdom, the temple boss Kogira uses that same theme, but in a way more epic and expansive way, a way that mirrors the events that happened in Wind Waker, but in a way that subliminally works to your memory and makes the moment feel so much more special because of it. It's just incredible. Honestly, this moment nearly made me cry. It's the motif in music can tell stories that the player didn't even realize they were hearing the whole time. For example, take Devil May Cry, Nero's Devil Trigger, and Virgil's Buried Light. If you put them together, you can hear how it solidifies and mimics each other. The chorus comes in perfectly just as Virgil's song is coming to an end. It's so beautiful to hear how their fates are completely entwined, and you can see that they share the same DNA, even in their own themes. It's genius. I love it. Music is a part of what makes gaming so special. It's a part of the heart that the games offer to us. I will never deny it or turn a cold shoulder towards it, but sometimes it can get in the way, and I want to hear a game for what it has to offer. I want to hear the atmosphere. At first, there was an easy answer to this. Why turn off the soundtrack? It was just so I could record footage easily without the music interfering. I'm a passionate editor and nothing distracts me more than an example like this.
Hey guys, welcome to my essay. LA Noire's intro tells you everything you need to know about the plotline, especially this first mission here, where you play as Cole Phelps walking through that alleyway. And I think that's just brilliant, you know?
This was just a joke example, but I often find it distracting in videos, and it sucks me out of the emotional beats presented by the content creator themselves when they don't control the music in ways that they can. If they're talking and then all of a sudden the game's soundtrack comes blaring in my head it completely ruins the entire flow of where the video was going. But if you remove a soundtrack from the video game, this could happen.
Hey guys, welcome to my essay. LA Noire's intro tells you everything you need to know about the plotline, especially this first mission here, where you play as Cole Phelps walking through that alleyway.
This isn't what we're looking for.
And I think that's just brilliant, you know?
In every game I record, at least I remove the music to make it way more satisfying for the audience to listen to, allowing them to retain within the environment and the atmosphere of the video that I'm making itself. For me, that's the easy answer, and it's the excuse I needed and had for a while of why I would turn off the soundtrack. But it got to a stage where I started doing it even when I wasn't recording, and it was very eye-opening and very familiar feeling. So I want to take a little deep dive and dig into the reasons why I find it more comforting to play without a soundtrack. Let's rewind time for a minute back to 2008. Coming from a council house, we couldn't afford luxury, but we got by with plenty of TVs. Every single room almost had their own TV, but with a house full of angry children, TVs got broken a lot, so we always were able to have a spare TV on hand. And this spare TV was primarily a grey CRT TV. If you got angry and broke your TV or threw, let's say, a stapler into the screen, then you were given the spare grey box. This TV literally lasted us years, to the stage that I even remember using it towards the closing years of the Xbox 360 era. Despite this TV not being HD or not being a plasma comparing to the visuals at the time, this TV had something that was special that made it a primary use for me personally. This TV had a headphone jack right in front of the screen. Before it was a standard for gaming controls to have a headphone jack, this opened a gateway for me to play games in a completely different immersive experience, especially during the night. Let me tell you something, playing the Elder Scrolls Oblivion on an old CRT TV at nighttime with headphones in and the music turned off, that's a core memory. That's a whole ass vibe that my generation was able to experience together. There was something so comforting being locked inside this bubble, but with that distinctive analog aesthetic that a CRT TV offers. Hearing the wind glide through the valleys, birds in the trees, grass crunching under each step of my character, rain hitting the cobblestone streets, and the world feeling more alive in so many ways that I never anticipated before. I already found Oblivion incredibly immersive, but once I turned off that music and experienced it in a new way, I was transported somewhere else entirely. And for me, that became a standard that I played many games with back in the day. I would play Battlefield Bad Company, the Halo trilogy, Dead Space, Resident Evil, all types of games that were offered on that generation, I was exploring completely with my ears, and that's now just become the new standard that everybody gets to experience. Leaning back in a comfy chair, headset on, playing a game with the full atmosphere it has to offer without the intrusion of a soundtrack swaying and persuading my emotions, allowing for the Foley and the world to tell the story it wants to tell with the sounds that it makes. On rare occasions, the official soundtrack of a video game can actually come pretty distracting. A great example here, and one that often jumps to mind, is the soundtrack to Assassin's Creed 3. The soundtrack itself is amazing and one of the best in the franchise, but there is something off about the battle music. It's loud, it's repetitive, it's meant to make you feel suffocated as you immerse yourself with the character of Connor, but it's that suffocation that becomes often quite daunting, especially for large scenes of combat, hearing that repetitive bell ring into your ears. By removing this factor and what I see personally as an annoyance, the street becomes way more atmospheric, but also the combat becomes way more focused and easier to read, without the overbearing wailing soundtrack blaring into your ears. You're met with otherwise a beautiful sound design of combat. Musket being readied, swords clashing, throats being slit, and necks being snapped. The general soundtrack for any Assassin's Creed is very important, especially for the time period that a game is set in, and for the most part the soundtrack of an Assassin's Creed game lifts the experience. But once you remove that, you're suddenly transported to the past and allowing you to take in the rich atmosphere that each game includes. And I can think of many examples where the music becomes often irritating. For example, when I think of a game or a soundtrack very similar to Signalis or even Silent Hill, on replays and hearing the industrial, often frightening soundtrack, entirely done on purpose to make you feel disturbed, on replays, it becomes annoying. When you're running past enemies and all of a sudden you're then invaded by the sound of nails in a dishwasher, makes you just want to go,
shut when you think about it.
And you turn it straight off. Because why would you want to listen to that when you know the scares aren't there on a second time round? Unless that's your kind of jam, which I know some people it clearly is. My nostalgia for a Resident Evil soundtrack is endless, and no one did iconic nostalgia like the classic RE games. But even then, they knew when to draw silent and let the atmosphere sit and speak for itself. When you think about the streets of Raccoon City and the sounds of distant crows and moans and screams, it all feels so suffocatingly horrific, and it makes Jill or Leon feel so isolated in the moment, and it made Raccoon City truly encapsulate the full feeling of what horror should be. Resident Evil's classic soundtrack knew these small moments of silence was important to allow the world to speak for itself in so many iconic great ways. And when playing the remakes, it makes you understand Capcom's new direction they went with the music. Instead of the soundtrack being a huge part of what makes the world so iconic, Capcom went in a way more subtle direction, which many are on the fence about whether it was the right move or not. So why not just remove it entirely? So of course I did. The ambient sound effects of modern Raccoon City matches the original and raises it then some. Removing that forced sense of urgency and zombies and the nemesis closing in on you, you're now left with a city trying to make its last escape. People screaming, helicopters flying, zombies wailing, cars crashing, sirens blaring, trees blowing seemingly untouched by the chaos which they're seeded within. The foliage sound work that goes into any Resident Evil game is so important and has been since the very beginning. There's a reason why there's such a clear nostalgia for the footsteps and the gear ruffling that the characters make during each game, because it's such a huge part of the identity of what Resident Evil has been built on. So listening to the top modern standard of that is such an incredibly beautiful yet haunting way to experience a modern Resident Evil game. Going back to the soundtrack of a modern Resident Evil, for some reason every time you encounter an enemy, they've added almost a battle music to the atmosphere when in combat. What this soundtrack is meant to do is add pressure to the player, allowing them to understand that they're in combat and of course understand when they're out of combat as well. But I find it way more horrifying to remove that entirely, removing that forced pressure that's put onto the player and leaving you with just the echoing sounds of a zombie in a hallway, allowing you to make the right choice and allowing you to assess the situation whether or not you are still in combat. Of course this will change player to player, but I also think this is very important to the presence and structure of horror itself. Dead Rising 3 was the first in the Dead Rising franchise to have music when fighting hordes of zombies. While walking and swinging your way at the hordes of the dead, you are then accompanied by the theme of Nick, or at least one of 3. That's meant to simulate the growing tension in the hordes, especially when the numbers grow bigger, the music will get louder, and it will accompany the player while you slaughter every single one of them in the thousands. But something I love about the original Dead Rising is that the music itself, of course apart from the psychopaths and of course key moments in the story, the music itself was a part of the location and the mall. Campy, happy, light-hearted jingle that felt out of place amongst the horrors of the undead. But by adding a new layer to this within Dead Rising 3, Nick's world doesn't feel as immersive as it did in the original. So once again, removing that music and allowing Nick to wander around and kill zombies without the interference of a synthetic emotion created by the developers, you're now thrown into your own world and your own take on what Dead Rising 3's atmosphere feels like. But I think overall Dead Rising 3's atmosphere and world and the city is heightened once you remove the music itself and allow the player to explore it freely with just their ears. A horror game's musical score in there entirely is very important to the mood, the tone, the setting, the period, the overall vibe any horror game gives. The likes of Silent Hill are almost carried along by the near flawless soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka every time he's on the decks. Horror and the music composer should coexist with each other for a good reason, and has spawned some of the best in the industry and what the genre and even the entertainment and the art form itself has to offer. I will never deny the importance of a great soundtrack when it comes to horror, but whenever Dead Space decides to give me some of this shit,
Shut when you think about it.
I love Dead Space. I think it's one of the greatest horrors ever made of all time. I've got so much love for just the Ishimura itself, but the soundtrack throughout the whole experience, even back in the original for me, wasn't doing it for me. On my first playthrough of the remake, I very quickly found myself turning the music off because I find the cheesy horror violins or even the musical stings to be almost too cliche and way on the nose for this type of horror experience. I find what Dead Space does so well is give that power fantasy to the player, allowing them to take control of the situation. From seeing Isaac Clarke becoming a simple space engineer to becoming the iconic fucking Isaac Clarke that he is. There comes a point in the game when you're so locked and loaded to the teeth that any enemy or any sense of dread that's in the air is completely taken away by a single swing of his fist. And for anybody playing the game, of course I understand Dead Space can be an often frightening experience, but there is eventually a point in the game whenever a necromorph or anything tries to scare you, the player will simply turn, laugh at their face and say, "Get the fuck back here, I am the monster."
Come back here and scare me!
And I think the soundtrack itself, though it's very John Carpenter and Alien-esque, which is fantastic in its own right, I think it doesn't do the right amount of justice of making the player feel as powerful as they deserve to feel. And despite that, it's the atmosphere alone of the Ishimura, especially in the remake, that you can hear the monsters crawling through the walls, the ship breathing, holding itself together to whatever functioning systems it has left, and its true immersion, that feeling of isolation of what makes horror like this so important and so special to so many fans. Dead Space itself, soundtrack or not, is about clawing at your chest and grabbing hold of your anxieties, and the atmosphere of the Ishimura is so incredibly beautiful that it does that without needing to even drop a single chord on its guitar strings or violin strings. Whatever that is, stop doing that, it's not scary. There is a different story being told within this ambience alone. The environments are now given a full chance to explore your mind, as we the players miss a lot of what these worlds' Foley sounds have to offer alone, that often being drowned out by the music itself and easily becoming mistaken for nothing more than environmental white noise. Now, I'm not trying to sound too negative here because I believe so many video games are lifted by their soundtracks alone. Have you ever tried playing Sifu without the soundtrack on, walking into that club scene and hearing nothing? It's so bizarre, it's deafening, it's silent, it's distracting to play, it doesn't feel right, and it doesn't hit in the same way at all. It's the game's tone and mood that is entirely lifted by the soundtrack itself. The likes of Hotline Miami and Devil May Cry for certain need that music to drive the player with a feeling of power and the speed and the harmony to cause harm to many you see. I'm not completely clueless, and I understand that for most people the soundtrack for many is what makes a game great and stand out. I can't travel anywhere without putting on my headphones and walking down the road. I may be heading to work, going to the shops. Music carries us, fuels us, reflects ourselves and how we see and interact with our emotions and how our emotions affect our worlds every single day. And so why should that feel any different with a soundtrack in a video game? Video games and our moods towards playing them changes and grows daily. Whether you're stressed and need that relief, or you have a little free time on the side and you just want to pick up and go. Maybe you're upset and in the mood for something just to chill you out. For me, when it comes to playing video games, it's all dependent on my emotions and how I feel myself. And I'm a firm believer in putting my whole soul into a new game that I'm experiencing, especially if it grabs me by the heart. Not in just a role-playing sense, but I mean emotionally. Call it ADHD, maybe a little bit of an autistic tendency, but I love video games and I could spend hours talking, playing, and just living them out in all the best and most crucial ways that I feel is possible. Turning off that music for me is just another step of embracing the thing that I love most. A sense of fresh air, a new perspective, something the game can offer me that I may have missed the first time around. Walking through the empty streets of New Mombasa in Halo ODST, cars left running, distant battles taking place, all while Rookie wanders alone on a rainy, foggy night. Wandering through Elden Ring's beautiful world, full of its secrets, full of its frightening monsters, a sense of freedom which is backed up by so many scary and yet distinctive sounding environments. Something as simple as the time of day or even the busier or less busier locations of walking through a game like Spider-Man. Yes, walking, I mean embracing the streets for what they have to offer instead of hiding on the rooftops. There is something so immersive and genuinely impressive with just how much depth has been put into these streets that a lot of people may have missed because they're too busy playing out their power dreams while swinging in the sky. I think the busy wandering city streets of any game set in a city are some of the best ambient noises you will ever hear. Just allow your character to walk forward and listen to the world speak for itself in so many unique different ways. Allow Hong Kong to feel alive in Sleeping Dogs. Let London's atmosphere seep into you as you walk through the streets of Watch Dogs Legion, or maybe become isolated in a desolate desert of Mad Max. There's so many great environments which just need you to take the time to stop, wonder, and just pay a little more attention. There is a comfort that comes from rich worlds developed by so many people in the team, even the ones that may not get as much attention. So many incredible sound designs and sound effects that bring comfort to us as players. And I think it's that back in 2008 which I began searching for. Games weren't just a serotonin escape for me, but they encapsulated every single inch of my being, of my personality. Ask anyone who's known me for that long. Gaming has been the one thing I've always loved, adored, and never distanced myself from. Turning off the music and becoming fully integrated with the games and becoming way more appreciative of the worlds that they allow you to be in, it's the best thing that a younger reclusive me had that I could use as anxiety source of an escape, and metaphorically reaching in past those screens and touching and interacting with that environment in the only way I knew how. Sitting there on a chair with a blanket around me and headphones in, listening to everything a game has to offer. There is a jubilant feeling I get from replaying or even viewing video games from a Foley perspective, and the amount of work that is offered and the amount of heart that is poured into each and every single game's environment and sound design that they have to offer. So by me turning off the music and just taking all of that in, it to me felt like the only way that I could turn around and say thank you to every single person that's involved in the development of some of my favourite games, and allowing a younger me to get past that younger reclusive era that I went through and embrace the beautiful sounds, the worlds, the realities, the stories that are told in every inch of detail in this incredible industry known as video games. So why do I play so many games with no soundtrack? Because it gives me the ultimate sense of comfort, and it reminds me why I love the games that we play. Hi, welcome to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this one. This is something I've had on my mind for quite a while, but I wasn't really sure how to put it into words until recently when I actually took some time and thought about this subject and thought about the direction that I wanted this video to go. And I hope it means something to some people who maybe even had similar experiences to me, but I'm not sure. Maybe this is just something that I'm alone, but I imagine not. The industry is broad and wide and many people share many similar feelings. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, it may be shorter than what I've been doing recently, but you know, it's something I wanted to get off my chest. But I hope this video brings comfort in some sort of ways, or just fascinating if not. But yes, feel free to like, subscribe, you know, do all that usual bollocks. And of course, I will see you at the next checkpoints. Goodbye.